Well, hello, everyone. I thought I would talk today about some new light that the Watchtower recently issued a couple of weeks ago at their annual meeting. As is their custom, they usually come out with some sort of adjustment in understanding. And Goffrey Jackson gave a talk saying, "Do not be surprised at sudden changes." I think that was an understatement, but it focused on a couple of verses in Revelation, the 17th chapter. And Jehovah's Witnesses can appreciate that Babylon the Great is not a political system, not an empire, but this system of false religion that originated in ancient Babel and Babylon. But anyway, she's riding on this seven-headed wild beast, and eventually the beast is going to turn on her and devour her because God puts it into their minds to do that, right? So verse 13, it says, "These have one thought," speaking of the kings of the earth. I'll just read verse 10 and back up there. "The 10 horns that you saw mean 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they do receive authority as kings for 1 hour with the wild beast. These have one thought, so they give their power and authority to the wild beast." And if you go down to verse 17, it mentions this again. "For God put it into their hearts to carry out his thought," yes, to carry out their one thought, "by giving their kingdom to the wild beast until the words of God have been accomplished." Well, the new thought is that the one thought, it used to be the one thought was they're united in their determination to get rid of false religion. But now the one thought is explained as their determination to give their kingdoms to the wild beast, to the 8th king. Okay, so what, right? Well, as you may or may not know, I've been talking about these things for as long as I've been online, which is about 22 years. And one of the first articles I've written on eWatchman was about world government. It was called "From Babel to Britannia." And it's not online anymore. My website has gone through several iterations. But going back to Babel, it was right after Noah's flood. And men began to repopulate the earth, I should say. And Jehovah told them to spread out and fill the earth. That was his original mandate to Adam and Eve. But there was this one fellow named Nimrod. And the Bible says he was a mighty hunter in opposition to Jehovah. And apparently he was a charismatic warrior. And he built cities as well. And one of the cities became known as Babel. And he got people organized to build this tower with its top in the heavens. And apparently he was like, a dictator. And virtually everyone alive then was under his influence. And so Jehovah, speaking to someone up there, I wonder who that was, "Let us go down and confuse their language." He said, "Look, there's one language that they have, and this is what they do. Let us go down there." So we know what happened. It's one of those amazing things that only God can do. Apparently people just woke up one morning speaking and understanding another language. We can kind of understand that, with computers. You can just put in a different program, right? So that's what happened, and people couldn't understand each other, and it says gradually they left off. So it wasn't just this Tower of Babel that God wanted to destroy. It was the grouping under one individual who was opposed to Jehovah, obviously a tool of Satan. So God thwarted that first attempt at what we will call a world government. In time, though, other empires were organized, and Babylon at one time, it actually conquered Jehovah's nation of Judah and destroyed his temple in Jerusalem. At its zenith, Babylon ruled over 120 jurisdictional districts. And of course, they had to have interpreters, and it wasn't an easy thing to do. Well, there's been other empires since Babylon, and Jehovah has allowed them to do what they do. And at one time, the British Empire became the largest empire ever, ruling over a quarter of the world's land mass and about a quarter of the world's population. But that was a little bit unwieldy, and it wasn't really sustainable. So the British consolidated their considerable wealth, which they'd gotten from looting the far-flung colonies of their empire, and they became a financial empire, headquartered in London, and specifically the city of London. And through various means that have developed over many years, principally the central bank that loans money to governments. It's hard to figure why a government needs to borrow money from a private banking institution, but they pulled it off. And about 50 years ago, the exchange rates were stabilized. The dollar was the world's reserve currency after World War II, and it was pegged to the dollar. $1 would buy, $32 would buy 1 ounce of gold. Right? But the British finagled and got the United States to abolish the gold standard. And it began this floating exchange rate system that we have now, where speculators and traders can make fortunes manipulating interest rates and the values of one currency against the other, and so on. And that system has been in play for the last half century. But now that system has reached its end, apparently. It was back in 1929. It was the great stock market crash. In fact, it was in October 1929. And after World War I, this great speculative bubble blew up on Wall Street. And, everybody was getting in on the act, taking their life savings and putting it into the stock market. And it just kept going up and up and up. And people were getting rich. But Webster Tarpley wrote a book, How London Orchestrated the Great Depression. And of course, they had bankers in Wall Street that were allied with the City of London, and they agreed to pull the plug on the stock market. And of course, the insiders started short selling or getting out of the market altogether, and then it just suddenly crashed. And it wiped out a lot of people. There were people jumping out of skyscrapers. They just lost everything. They couldn't go on. But it was really one of the world's biggest wealth transfers from little people, middle-class people, to the wealthiest. And I believe we're on the edge of that right now, only much, much larger. But before I go on with that thought, that one thought of giving their kingdom to the wild beast. And I read the transcript of Jackson's talk. I didn't see the video, but he rightly pointed out this is something that nations do not do. They do not willingly hand over their sovereignty. We've seen it in a limited way in the EU. Member nations of the EU have relinquished some of their sovereignty. They don't have control over their national budgets. They can't control their borders. If Brussels says you got to let, 100,000 migrants in, what are you going to do? And they can punish you if you don't follow the strict guidelines of Brussels. So we're talking about something like that, only on a much larger scale, global, and we have to say it would be complete. It would be the first ever world government. And of course, Jackson didn't use that term, world government, but what else could it be? If all the kings of the world, all the presidents and kings, there are a few kings around here and there, they abdicate their authority and will abide by the dictates of this eighth king. And the Watchtower believes it's the United Nations. I don't have any reason to doubt that, because as I say, it's not an easy thing to rule billions of people in a vast globe. And so the United Nations has, this infrastructure in place, and it has some credibility, I would say. But it is hard to envision nations willingly abdicating their rulership. And I think where it says, the kings give, I think they're under coercion. They will be. And, it's like somebody's going to make them an offer they can't refuse, right? So, this world is ruled by some very ruthless people who are determined to get what they want, and they have the means to do that. So going back to that Great Depression and where we are now, there's a couple of mammoth institutions. I don't even know what they are, private equity or, banks, BlackRock and Vanguard. They're investment vehicles that have just become monstrous. BlackRock is, 9 trillion, and Vanguard is somewhat less than that. And they have controlling interests by buying up stocks of all the companies on the stock exchange, that they have the power, just these two companies, and there's others, lesser ones. But if they wanted to, they could do what Wall Street did in '29. Crash the system. And I believe that's what's going to happen. An intentional crash to bankrupt everybody and then swoop in, and because they already have a controlling interest in many companies, select the ones they want to control, discard the rest, and a handful of people could end up owning everything. Because everybody would be bankrupt. The dollar would crater to zero. And, I've spoken about this before. The Great Taking, forget the guy who authored this book recently, explained how the banks that loan money for mortgages and everything, they don't, if they go under, a lot of the regional banks and small banks and probably even the bigger banks will go under. But the obligations of the person paying the mortgage or the person paying on the car or whatever, those have been rolled up into derivatives. And whoever owns those derivatives has a claim against anything that you think you own. So again, literally, and this applies to nations as well. That's why they are intentionally bankrupting the United States. $1 trillion every 3 months added to the budget. Oh, no problem. Well, it will be a problem at some point. And they can literally foreclose on the United States, take over the government, foreclose. So this idea that someone is willingly going to abdicate their sovereignty, that there's going to be some collusion involved, believe me. So what would be the point of this? And by the way, the Watchtower says the League of Nations was the eighth king, and it went into the abyss, and during World War II, and then miraculously the United Nations appeared as if climbing out of the abyss. And ever since then, the Watchtower has touted its prowess to be able to discern how these prophecies work. In fact, during World War II, Nathan Knorr gave a talk, Peace Can at Last, predicting that the war would end and this peace organization would come on the scene. So that's impressive. But I wrote an article this week, that's why these things are fresh on my mind, about don't be surprised about these big changes. I put a link to the article here, and I'm going over some of those things, so if you've already read it, then you don't have to watch this video. But the Watchtower, it is confusing for anyone that tries to unravel some of these things. The Bible, of course, in Revelation 13 depicts a seven-headed wild beast. And in the 17th chapter, John saw a scarlet-colored beast with 7 heads that comes out of the abyss. And the Watchtower claims these are 2 separate beasts. And that is not even sensible or reasonable or scriptural. And what has them all gummed up when they're trying to understand this is their fixation on 1914. And to make that work, they have to claim that the wild beast suffered a mortal head wound in 1914. And even though the Anglo-American dual world power was victorious in World War I, they claim that it suffered this catastrophic blow and then recovered. But that doesn't really work because, as I say, there's only one wild beast. Why though does Revelation depict the scarlet-colored beast? The other beast is not depicted as scarlet. Well, the scarlet-colored beast takes on that hue when it comes out of the abyss because it's angry. And that reflects the anger of Satan and the demons when they are thrown down to the earth. And they go off in a great rage. And what's the first thing they do? Whack the head of their own beast to collapse the system so they can impose what? A global government? But what's wrong with that? What's wrong with global government? God's kingdom is going to be a global government, right? Yes. But this global government that will come into existence when this system collapses will be ruled over by Satan. Yeah, but Jehovah's Witnesses will say Satan has always been the ruler of the world. In fact, Jesus called him the ruler of the world. And that's true. But he hasn't been given carte blanche yet. For example, and I know I've cited this before, but it's worth repeating, Persia was one of the heads of that 7-headed empire, was it not? And it conquered Babylon, and the Jews were in captivity in Babylon. But Jehovah had decreed that a man named Cyrus, the Persian king who overthrew Babylon, would liberate his people. He called Cyrus his anointed one. So anyway, Daniel was receiving a revelation from an angel, and the angel informed him that the prince of Persia was opposing him for 21 days until Michael came to his assistance. And he said he stood up as a strengthener to the king of Persia. So the prince of Persia is a demonic prince because no human prince could oppose a mighty angel. So we have a demonic prince trying to prevent an angel from coming to the assistance of the king of Satan's earthly empire. So obviously God did not abdicate his authority to the beast because he used Persia to benefit his people, to let them go. And Jehovah's Witnesses will probably take offense with this, but, and I'm not patriotic in any way, but I do think that America has been blessed by God. People use that expression, God bless America. Well, I think he did. He did because he used it to benefit people. And, the people that founded this country, they came over here fleeing religious persecution. The original pilgrims, they were devout Christians as they knew the Bible. And they brought their King James with them. And then their offspring, a couple generations later, founded a country based on freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of expression. And all those things are what have benefited Jehovah's Witnesses especially, because they were a persecuted, hated religious minority. They were mobbed and beaten and put in jails back in the 30s and 40s because they wouldn't salute the flag or join the military and all of that. But they were protected by the United States government. The Supreme Court ruled in their behalf. In fact, court cases involving Jehovah's Witnesses back then are studied by students of law for the precedent that they set. So that's why I say God blessed America, past tense, because Jesus said the good news of this kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth. America was the seedbed. Never had a war fought in the United States, except the Civil War, of course. Protected by two vast oceans, friendly neighbors, north and south. So America has been a haven, and Jehovah has used it, just like he used Persia to accomplish his work. And now that work is accomplished. Jesus said the good news will be preached first, and then the end will come. The end of what? The end of the world? No, the end of this system. You see, when this beast comes out of the abyss, God will no longer have anything to do with that political system. Whatever Jesus has been doing behind the scene, we can't say. But he's prevented the United States from devolving into a dictatorship. Do you know that almost happened? After the Great Depression, the bankers organized a conspiracy. Roosevelt was trying to undo the disaster created by those whom he called the economic royalists. He knew London was behind it. 2 assassination attempts against him failed, just like with Donald Trump recently. But in his case, one of the assassin's bullets killed, I think it was the governor of Florida. I may be mistaken, it's one governor, I can't remember. So anyway, Roosevelt saved the United States from falling into a fascist dictatorship, because that's where it was going. And if you want to read the story of Smedley Butler, who was a general, he was the one that made that phrase, war is a racket. And he blew the whistle because he was an insider and heard that they were scheming to overthrow Roosevelt and impose a fascist dictatorship. So did Jesus foil that coup? But we just read in Revelation that it's God's thought, too, that they should hand their kingdoms over, that this 8th king should rule for 1 hour. And it's going to be tyranny that we've never before experienced. The Bible says no one will be able to buy or sell unless they have this mark of the beast. Well, Satan knows what is required of Christians, and he knows what it will take to get them to compromise. I think this new system, new world order that they intend on implementing, that God is going to allow them to implement, apparently it'll be some sort of digital-based currency that is do away with cash and banks and all of that, and any transactions that you have. They'll give you a stipend, an allowance. Like China has a system now. You have a credit score, and marks against you disallow you from interacting and doing certain things, because they can track everything we do now. I mean, no need to go into all of that, but so this new world digital currency will cut people out of the system who do not in some way pledge their allegiance to Satan. And because that's who will be represented by this eighth king. The two-horned lamb that comes out of the earth, it's the Anglo-American duo. After it gets whacked, it shows it as a separate beast. It says it speaks as a lamb, and then it begins speaking as a dragon. Well, who's the dragon? The 12th chapter says Satan the devil is the dragon. So this polite, benevolent, democratic thing is going to die and be replaced by a system that channels Satan the devil. And you better do what he says, or he will cause you to be killed. You'll be locked out of the system. And that's what we're going to be facing when these kings give their authority to the wild beast for 1 hour. No wonder that Jesus called it the hour of test that is coming upon the inhabited earth. To put a test upon those dwelling on the earth. Well, I think I was going to read another scripture here. I had one in mind going back to Ezekiel. No, let's see. Not Ezekiel. Isaiah, the 10th chapter. All of the empires that make up this seven-headed wild beast, 3 of them are used, talked about in prophecy: Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. And Jehovah has used them. Again, even though they're part of Satan's system, Jehovah used them as punishing agents. And then when he was through with them, he disposed of them. Right? So this is Isaiah 10, chapter 5, and Jehovah's trying to determine how he's going to punish his people. And he says, aha, the Assyrian, the rod to express my anger, and the staff in their hand for my denunciation. I will send them against an apostate nation, against the people who infuriated me. And I will command him to take much spoil and plunder, and to trample them like the mud in the streets. But he will not be inclined this way, and his heart will not scheme this way, for it is in his heart to annihilate and to cut off many nations, not a few. Well, Jesus said that Jerusalem would be trampled on by the nations during a great tribulation. Of course, he's not talking about the literal city. It represents Christianity, God's people. Jerusalem is where Christianity started. So Paul said that Christ will not come until the apostasy comes first. And so here is Jehovah's judgment against an apostate nation. I'll read one more, couple of verses here in verse 12. When Jehovah finishes all his work on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, so we're talking about Christianity, he will punish the king of Assyria. He represents the eighth king. For his insolent heart and his proud, arrogant gaze. For he says, I will do this by the strength of my hand and with my wisdom, for I am wise. And notice this, I will remove the boundaries of peoples and pillage their treasures, and I will subdue the inhabitants like a mighty one. Well, Jehovah refers to him in a not very flattering way. He says, will the axe itself exalt over the one who chops with it? Job is saying, I used you as an instrument. You have no control over what I want to do. You did my work. And that's what the nations don't understand. But it is interesting, that this arrogant king says, I will remove the boundaries of peoples and pillage their treasures. Well, we're starting to see that, aren't we? Several politicians who've sounded the alarm about this floods of millions of immigrants into Europe and America, and they've said quite astutely, a nation without borders is not a nation. Some have theorized or speculated that the Democrats just want to bring in millions of people so they can enroll them as voters. Well, that's probably true, but there's more to it than that. Like I say, it's happening in Europe. They're being inundated mostly by immigrants from Africa, people with entirely different culture, history, different religion. And the whole point is to erase borders. That is the policy of this globalist initiative that is now moving faster and faster to take down the nation-state system, to reduce nations to satraps and territories under the authority of one central government, one central bank, and that's the eighth king. I guess that's about it. Hopefully, I'll have more to say about this at a future day. Hopefully, see you next Sunday. Thanks for watching.